Hello, and welcome to our webinar on kind extinction. I'm Amy Cook, BCBA and Community Manager from Hi Rasmus, and I want to go over a few things before we get started. First, you will all be eligible to earn one free CEU if you're watching this live and you complete a few requirements. We will share 3 keywords throughout the webinar that you need to write down. After the webinar, I will share an online form to complete, and you will type in the 3 keywords to confirm your participation. A recording will be sent out to all the registrants. However, only live participants are eligible to earn the CEU. The first keyword is compassionate. I will also type that in the chat. And I'll type it in the chat in just a minute. Before I hand it over to our fabulous guest speakers, I want to share a little more about Hi Rasmus. Hi Rasmus is an ABA clinical software company that was inspired by our founder's son, Rasmus, who was diagnosed with autism early on in his life. Our goal is to help deliver the highest quality behavioral therapy services to 1 million children with autism by helping the people who help them: behavior analysts, techs, teachers, parents, and clinical directors, and all of you. We provide the best clinical platform so you can keep the focus on the child in front of you. Our team wanted to start the new year off with more compassionate care. With that said, I will let Courtney and Dr. Tarbox introduce themselves and get us started.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to Hi Rasmus for inviting us to talk today and present on our paper. I am Courtney Tarbox. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at First Steps for Kids. We're an ABA provider based in California with a few locations. And our paper that we're talking about today was actually a treatment evaluation that we ran with several of our clients at First Steps. Jonathan, do you want to introduce yourself? I'm also noticing that your Zoom name says that you are me for some reason.
What? Oh, weird. That's really funny. Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Tarbox, and I'm the Chief Science Geek at First Steps for Kids. And then I'm the Program Director for the Masters of Science in ABA program at USC, which is in Southern California. And so we are an all in-person, small-scale, on-ground master's program in ABA that focuses on scientist practitioner model and social justice in training young BCBAs.
All right. And I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. I know the start of a new year can be very busy, and I'm just seeing how many people have joined us live. So just really appreciative of your time and that you're choosing to spend it with us. We're going to try to leave ample time for questions and conversation at the end. We really are looking forward to hearing from others on this topic. And so Amy has suggested that we hold questions until the end. That said, please put them into the chat or the Q&A, whatever works best, so that we can field them at the end, and hopefully we will have time to get to most of those. Okay.
There are people from all over the world in the chat.
Yeah.
Really cool. Tatiana Valika, I don't know if you remember me, but we emailed from Moldova to the United States 15 years ago or something like that. Great to see you here. It's really cool.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, I think I would be used to this by now. Okay. I've shared my screen correctly, right? All right. So again, thanks for joining us today as we talk about kind extinction, a paper that we published, I think, over the summer at some point, so 2023. And we actually completed this treatment evaluation maybe 5 or maybe closer to 6 years ago. So it took us a while to write it up, but we're really happy to share it with you today. And when we were preparing for today, I started thinking about that really, to me, kind extinction and the procedures that it entails is really one step toward a broader shift that we see our field moving toward in compassionate care. And so we're going to talk about it in that way today, and just that this is one step in one procedure, but certainly not like a blanket recommendation that equates to now providing compassionate care. And just a quick shout out to our team at First Steps and our co-authors on the paper, Tara Bermudez, Erin Silverman, and Lauren Surveyon, helped to implement the treatment evaluation and write up the paper, and are still our team members at First Steps doing the work each day. So definitely wanted to give them a shout out. Okay. So just to take a quick moment to orient us toward our values. Just who do we want to be as behavior analysts and just as human beings? How do we want to show up each day for our clients? I think that I can pretty safely assume that our hearts are full of compassion, and that we hope this is maybe how we are supporting our learners that we get to work with each day. And yet, if we're open to hearing some of the criticisms of ABA, we might hear that at times, maybe this is how we are being experienced by the clients that we get to work with, and that maybe our field is perceived in this way by others outside of ABA, in that the way that we're implementing our procedures and our interventions may be a bit cold, even though I think all of our hearts would not be represented this way, that we are all in it to be supportive and show compassion toward those that we work with. So those are our shared values, and they're in our ethics code. That our ethics code outlines that we have a responsibility to use the least restrictive procedures possible to bring about effective change, and that we are obligated to minimize the use of physical guidance, and that we have a responsibility to treat others with compassion and dignity. And also, like, that's so cool. That's in our ethics code. We have an obligation to be compassionate.
And
and
maybe
so,
worth noting that it's newly in our ethics code, right? I think
Mhm.
the word compassion showed up only a couple of years ago, which is great.
2020,
Better late than
yeah.
never, right? But maybe if this is who we want to be, maybe we have some time to make up for.
Mhm. And if we think about what does compassion mean within ABA, we have some recent, I guess recent-ish, not all that recent anymore, but some recent papers from Taylor et al., where they define compassion as alleviating suffering or distress of others. And then if we think about that behavior analytically, what that might mean, we think it might mean that we have an obligation to minimize negative reinforcement and punishment, that we have a really important responsibility to make sure that we're arranging for a context that's rich of positive reinforcement and really minimizing any aversives that we are presenting. And so this might mean that we have a responsibility to minimize the use of extinction, particularly escape extinction, and that we have an obligation to consider how we respond to assent withdrawal when our clients show us that they are no longer willingly participating in whatever we are presenting, and that we have a responsibility to increase the aversiveness of our extinction procedures when we are implementing them, if we are implementing them. And that maybe we have a responsibility to overtly empathize with what our learners' experiences are.
Yeah, and I might add too that, I remember talk maybe 10, 20 years ago, folks were, with the sort of anti-aversives movement and things like that, people speaking out against extinction. And one of the sort of retorts was, well, extinction isn't aversive. It's not punishment. It's simply the, the breaking the contingency between the response and the reinforcer. And from a purely technical definition standpoint, I suppose that's true. But if we look at how extinction is actually experienced by the person experiencing extinction, it's obviously aversive. And even a rat will bite a lever under conditions of extinction. So it's kind of a false narrative to say, well, technically extinction isn't aversive because it's simply the, no longer delivery of reinforcement. If it's experienced as aversive, then it is. I mean, that's a functional definition of what's aversive. And I don't know that anyone's actually done this, but one could imagine arranging research that explicitly delivered the opportunity to experience extinction, but contingent on a response, to show that the opportunity to experience extinction itself is probably a punisher, right? And I don't know that anyone's actually even done that research, but it would be interesting. But regardless, let's just be honest. If anyone's ever put you on extinction, like we all know this, like getting ghosted with text messaging or a loved one or something like that, it sucks. Extinction is aversive. It's obvious. Not always, not under all contexts, but in many circumstances, it is.
Perfect segue, actually. So we don't even need to read the definition of extinction. We know procedurally that we're discontinuing that reinforcement that has maintained a behavior so that behavior will decrease in the future. And in its implementation, as Jonathan was saying, like sometimes this is how our clients might experience extinction, whether it's attention extinction or not. I think like somewhere along the lines, a lot of us learned that even if we're implementing tangible extinction, we also withhold our attention during those moments, maybe so we don't shape up another function or whatever it may be. And if we just do some quick perspective taking on what that may be like for the individual that we're interacting with, we can like stick to our definitions and say, well, we're ignoring the behavior or withholding reinforcement for the behavior, not the whole child. But if we're being honest, the child's experience of that, or the learner's experience of that, is that we're ignoring them maybe as a whole person, and that we're withholding something that they really care about and that they really want in that moment, and that's really difficult. And so we have a choice for how we can show up for those that we work with in those moments that we know are really difficult for them. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today and what we set out to really look at is like, how can we, stick with our science and really ensure that we are being effective, and how can we like bring our heart along with us and make sure that we can also be human beings while implementing our procedures, and that we can care about what our clients' experience is and how can we support them in those challenging moments, and like validate their experience and show them that we care and that we will be there alongside them while they experience those difficult moments, and not sacrifice what our procedures are so that we can still make sure that we are being effective in whatever change we are hoping to bring about. Okay, so as we know, like multiple things can be true. We can be effective, and also we can be kind and hopefully compassionate while we are putting our empathy into action and choosing how we can implement our procedures, maybe by making extinction less aversive within its implementation. Okay, this is our first I want to say code word. I feel like that's not what Amy said in the beginning, but this is the first word that you need to jot down.
I'm going to interrupt Courtney. Sorry. It's the second keyword.
The second word. Yes. Thank you. Write that down. Okay. So moving on to our paper and sort of like the background. This is one of our daughters, Margot Juniper, when she was a little one. So this, again, highlights how long it kind of took us to get our act together and get this paper submitted. She's almost 9 now, and I think she's 3 in this picture. And really, this is how the idea for kind extinction came about. I think Margot was not wanting to do something, maybe like brush her teeth or something like that, and had thrown herself to the floor and was protesting as 3-year-olds may do. And I had this like conflict in the moment of like, I need to follow through. I've asked her to brush her teeth. And this is my 3-year-old child who's having a really tough time in this moment. And I would like to scoop her up and comfort her and offer her a hug while I tell her it's time to brush her teeth. And I remember it just like that, where it was like this moment where I actually physically paused. And then later that night, Jonathan and I had this conversation of like, isn't that sort of strange that like we're having this internal conflict because it's our child of doing what we know is effective and best. But also we want to like be loving, caring parents and be there for our kids when they're showing us that they're having a hard time. And is there a way to do both? And then the next bit was like a bit of discomfort that this was only occurring to us because it was our child. And at least I work with little ones every day. And so that was the kind of the catalyst for this treatment evaluation was looking at if we can implement functional extinction while also choosing to offer comfort to the person that we're interacting with. Anything to add there, Jonathan? Can you change your name?
No.
It's really distracting.
I could try, yeah. Yeah, and not just offer comfort non-contingently, but actually offer it contingent on the problem behavior. Like your face is turning red, you're stomping your feet or whatever it is, and you're just about to have a tantrum, or maybe you're even starting one. And in that moment, is it possible to show you that I care about how you're feeling right now and that I want to comfort you and make you feel better, even though you're misbehaving? Is it possible to do that in a way that still effectively decreases the behavior in the long run?
So here is the paper, and it's open access, so you should be able to find it quite easily. And so what we set out to look at was exactly that, a procedural modification to traditional extinction, because like Jonathan was saying, we are not just withholding the reinforcement contingency of the behavior, but in addition to withholding the functional reinforcer, contingent on whatever the interfering behavior was, we chose to offer arbitrary or non-functional reinforcers to that behavior in the form of attention or physical comfort, and see if the behavior that we were looking at would still decrease over time because we were withholding the functional reinforcer. And then we looked at social validity with caregiver and staff surveys to see like how effective they found the procedure to be and how acceptable or preferable they found the procedure to be. Okay, so what are we talking about? Some examples of the kindness that we offered to the clients. And so we did, I think we did ISCAs or PFAs for 3 of the 4 participants and found that tangible or escape to tangible was the primary synthesized contingency, maintaining the behaviors. And so while we withheld the preferred tangible and continued with whatever the demand was in place, contingent on the interfering behavior, we offered vocal acknowledgement and or some physical comfort. So just some examples here of what that looked like. Got down to the child's level, offered them a quick hug or to maybe hold their hand or rub their back. Also labeled what their emotion appeared to be, and labeled what the EO or like the upsetting circumstance appeared to be. and an empathetic statement. And so it might be like, you look really frustrated. I know it's hard to wait for the blocks. Do you want me to help you do whatever the task was, or something like that? And of course, tailoring the language so that it was appropriate for the learner. One point here, and I think one of the biggest things that I actually learned during the process was that, like, obviously we need to individualize what kindness looks like too. So at first we were operationalizing everything, and like, here, we'll have this list of responses that we can offer as kindness. And then we quickly saw that in the moment, like when this one kiddo is really upset, if I go to rub his back, he actually does not appear to like that. His behavior escalated more in that moment. And so don't do that. It did not function in a kind way for that kid. Another kiddo, when we tacted what his emotion appeared to be, it kind of was like the rub it in function rather than functioning in a compassionate way. And so if we observed that in the moment, then we would not do that anymore and not offer that as a form of kindness, because it didn't land that way for the learner. And so anything that we had seen in the past based on this child's learning history and their preferences are what we offered as kindness, and nothing was ever forced. It was just offered. And if we saw that it worsened their emotional responding at all in the moment, then we would discontinue whatever that offer was.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that this dovetails with the feedback from the autistic community and the neurodiversity community, is that they're saying, like, we don't need you to be compassionate. We need you to listen to us and center our preferences and our voices if you're trying to help us in your ABA treatment. And so that's exactly what we were trying to do here. Was, it's not like we're trying to get the kid to comply with, like, socially appropriate compassion or something like that. We don't care about that. It's like whatever actually would genuinely make the kid feel better in the moment and function as comfort to the kid is what we would do. And if, compassion over compliance, exactly. And if we couldn't figure out what that is, then that's okay. Maybe we're not able to deliver kindness in that moment. We do our best, but we'd be really responsive to the kid's facial expression and the kid's body language. And even if the kid doesn't have any words at all to tell us what works as kindness or compassion to that child, mammals move away from stuff they don't like, and they move towards stuff they like, and it's easy enough to see in the kids' facial expression and in their body language when the RBT was giving a form of kindness that actually felt good and was appreciated by the child. And so they just had to really pay attention and just be in that moment with the kiddo and be responsive to how the kid responded to the RBT's behavior.
And the hope was,
giving
that
them space.
we're
Definitely.
able to, like, validate what they're going through, to acknowledge that, like, this is tough. We're like, within Extinction, we're withholding the thing that they want in that moment, and that's really difficult. And so just acknowledging that, hopefully in a way that they feel seen and can have, like, that space to experience it, and we're going to acknowledge that, not just ignore it.
And it fits with the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations regarding assent. Also, they say that pediatricians should, if they must treat a child, counter to the child's assent. So, for example, if you have to give the kid a shot and the kid is saying no and crying and scared, the nurses will hold them and give them the shot. If you have to do that, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that the doctor apologizes to the child, apologizes. And so we feel pretty good about that. Like, yeah, we could apologize for saying, I'm sorry, bud, we got to get this work done. Like, yeah, I know it's hard, some folks might feel like that kind of undermines our authority or something if we're apologizing to a client. But again, I think that emphasizes the idea of compliance, like we're the authority figure and the kid has to do what we say. That's not the case. We can manage those contingencies. We can follow through with the response requirement while apologizing for it and being kind and connecting with the child on a genuine level. Like, I know this is hard. I know you don't want to do this right now.
And lots of other branches of psychology obviously talk about this in different ways and in terminology. And many of us within ABA are doing this, and it might be kind of like, yeah, obviously. And like we don't have it specifically carved out as part of like our obligation and like how we want to make sure that we're showing up for those that we're working with. It is a bit counterintuitive to just like the technical definition of extinction, that like, wait a minute, we're gonna give them something that we know functions as a reinforcer elsewhere, but that's not functionally related in this moment, contingent on the behavior that we're trying to decrease. And so it might feel a bit counterintuitive in that way. And also, it also might feel like very intuitive in that moment, because for like most of us as human beings in a helping profession, like we want to be there to support the client that we're working with. So these are just some like very busy visuals that I made for our team of examples of how we might implement tangible extinction. And so if a child is told it's time to put like the toy away at bedtime, and then they're falling to the floor and crying, our expectation of like the like no more toy or like, you know, remaining without the toy would remain in place. And we can do that with compassion. And so we might offer assistance, reassure them that they can do it even though it's hard, offer genuine empathy of I'm so sorry that you're feeling sad right now, offering some comfort. So any of these things, and like the behavioral translation is still there, that like we are keeping that contingency in place. We're going to wait but not physically prompt, and maybe like model tacting like that, the tolerance of doing tough stuff in service of like, you know, what comes later, so we can start to model those skills. And then here's another example for escape extinction. I'm not going to take the time to describe it. I'm happy to share slides and everything with everyone.
Yeah, and these are pretty good. Wait, go back. These are pretty good, like high quality images. So you could like print these out and stick them on your break room wall or whatever for your clinic if you want. They're not copyrighted or anything like that. So feel free to share.
Okay, so here are the results from our treatment evaluation. And so I wanted to note too that we did take data on manding behavior during baseline as well as during treatment. We did not prompt manding behavior, but we did reinforce it both in baseline and during treatment, because we didn't want to just have an extinction procedure in place. We also wanted to make sure that we had contingent reinforcement for any, you know, replacement behaviors that served the same function. And so you'll see with the closed circles there that with the implementation of kind extinction, we saw a pretty quick and consistent decrease in whatever the interfering behaviors were for each client. And we saw increases in manning behavior, even though we weren't specifically teaching mans. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say there, but I'm forgetting. Anything else, Jonathan?
Sure, yeah. So let's just take a look. I guess if you look at the top graph for Agnes, we've got one data point in the beginning of the kind extinction phase that's above the baseline level. So that, depending on your definition of an extinction burst, that could be a little extinction burst. And then for the other three participants, no bursting at all, like rapid and pretty clear, either immediate decrease like Ingrid and Mildred, or gradual decrease as in Gilbert. But really, you know, we didn't directly compare kind extinction to a more traditional extinction, but just in terms of familiarity with the literature and also just our own clinical experience, this definitely worked good enough clinically, right? Like the treatment teams were happy with this reduction that we saw in the tantrum behavior.
Mm-hmm. And that is sort of like, you know, an anecdotal note that we had during this, and like maybe an idea for future research was like, if offering kindness and making sure that we're attending to how that functions for the learner in the moment, meaning that it didn't worsen any emotional responding or like cause an extinction burst, can offering that form of kindness, maybe prevent the likelihood of an extinction burst? Are we less likely to see it if we're also like validating what the learner's experience is?
Yeah, and for sure, future research should collect affect data, right? So we can actually
Yeah.
see does their emotional responding change also, and how does it affect that? Like Denny Reed has published 1 million studies on that. It's totally
Mm-hmm.
doable. We should
Mm-hmm.
just, yeah, definitely be doing that in the future.
Mm-hmm. And easy to do is what we're observing their
Yeah.
affect or facial expressions to be. And then we can choose how to respond to that. Okay, so just a quick summary of what we found, that like offering genuine positive attention and emotional validation while implementing escape and or tangible extinction was effective in decreasing interfering behavior. And then we also found on our social validity surveys that that caregivers and the staff implementing kind extinction found it to be more socially acceptable and effective. And so I guess that wasn't surprising, but it was really neat to see. And just having the conversations with the RBTs implementing this procedure, it was almost like they were breathing a sigh of relief, of like, oh, okay, I get to do this. This is like great. They just really enjoyed it. And it was like a form of permission that they had to also like be there as a source of comfort for the child that they were working with. Just like also a harsh reminder of maybe what we were not doing before. But still like really just really important feedback that we got from those that were implementing it. So when we talk about social validity, this is always my shtick. And like, how are we creating space for specifically client social validity within all that we're doing, our goals and our procedures and our outcomes, and infusing some kindness into the procedures of extinction. Maybe a really easy way for us to increase client social validity when we are deeming extinction necessary to implement. Because again, in those moments, because of what extinction entails, like we know that it's difficult, and that what we're asking our clients and their caregivers to do is like really difficult in that moment. And we justify that because of the outcome that we're striving to achieve. And if there's a way to make that a bit less aversive in the moment, we probably have an obligation to do that if we can be equally effective.
And again, future research, it would be really cool to see somebody use something like a concurrent change procedure or a treatment choice procedure where the kiddo presses one button, or they go to one side of the room and they get traditional extinction, or if they cross the line and go to the other side of the room, they get kind extinction, and just see which one does the client choose. And if they're both equally effective and the client consistently chooses one over the other, well, then there's client social validity right there. And of course, the affect data, like we were saying before, if the client's smiling more and crying less or grimacing or frowning less under kind extinction compared to traditional extinction, that would be a nice piece of client social validity too, potentially.
And maybe even like, well, I guess that would be within the treatment choice procedure, but like assenting to extinction,
Yeah.
if we're going to like be there alongside them while they experience it.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are just 2 points that we talk about in the paper a bit, but like maybe creating nurturance and support for our learners, even and maybe even especially during those most difficult times, is the purpose of what we do in ABA. And maybe how compassionate a procedure is can start to be viewed as equally important to how effective and socially valid that procedure is.
Yeah, and I think Courtney, between the two of us, Courtney's kind of always the more reasonable one, I think, and a little bit more like measured and kind of less outlandish or whatever. I think at this point, I'm willing to just say publicly that I'm just not willing to do an ABA procedure if I can't do it compassionately. I don't think I have the right to help another human if I can't be compassionate in the way that I do it. And if I find myself in a place where I can't do that in the moment, then I think I'm outside my scope of competence. I think I need to refer to somebody else, or I need to tag somebody else in the clinic and say, hey, I need some help here. Can you take over? Like, I'm not able to show up with love and kindness right now.
Yeah, you did tend to be the more outlandish one, but that's not this. Like, this is the bare minimum, especially if we know we can be just as effective. We don't have the right to not be compassionate. And we each as clinicians have that choice to make each day with how we show up to support our learners.
One other, I don't think we have, wait, can you go back just for one sec? I don't think we didn't put a bullet in for this, but someone mentioned way early on in the chat about rapport and sort of the relationship
Yeah,
between the
yeah,
kiddo and the RBT, or the kiddo and the BCBA.
yeah.
And we don't know, this is just a theory, but it sure makes sense that if we build a really positive relationship and really establish ourselves as a source of positive reinforcement, and build rapport in the relationship in this manner from the beginning, we're less likely to condition ourselves to be aversive, and therefore less likely to motivate the client to want to avoid learning interactions, right? In other words, we're building a relationship where the kid wants to approach us and earn what we got. And so it kind of seems like it seems possible that if we incorporate more approaches like this, we'll actually get higher engagement in the long run from the learner, and they'll learn more and they'll learn faster. So it could actually make ABA more effective by backing off a little bit and being a little more kind, a little more compassionate. Purely speculation at this point, right? Research is needed on this, but it actually makes sense from a behavioral principles standpoint.
Yeah, yeah. And today we're just talking about this one procedure, and that research is coming, right? Like, there is some, like Alice Schillingsberg and colleagues have rapport building procedure that they showed that they're only introducing demands contingent on that foundation of rapport, and the learner choosing to engage in whatever the teaching is. And so, like, just like that relationship is paramount, and like it just makes sense too. But yeah, I mean, there's so many people doing great work now in rapport building, assent-based practice, and just like really considering, at least, like, does extinction need to be the go-to and included in every behavior plan? Maybe not, maybe that's where we're heading, or at least like considering what needs to be tried before we add extinction to a behavior plan.
Yeah, and Dr. Knox is asking the question, how is that different from pairing in the early relationship establishment phase? And it's not. I think it's part of that. It's all part of that. And yet it seems like oftentimes what we do in sort of day-to-day ABA programs is like, oh yeah, make sure and pair yourself with reinforcement for a while and then get to work. And so often it seems like the RBTs get in there and just implement discrete trials at a high rate because that's what causes learning, before they've really effectively established the rapport. And so it's sort of like, yeah, we'll sort of try to do the pairing and the rapport building in the beginning, but then when it doesn't work, it goes out the window. And so that's what's so exciting about Alice Schillingsberg work that you mentioned, Courtney, is that they have specific criteria to move ahead in the pairing procedure and the rapport building procedure. And so far, I mean, it's only been replicated once, but that's 2 studies with, I don't know, a total of about 10 or 12 participants that show that it's very, very effective for about 80 or 90% of the participants, and that they get them engaging in high rates of discrete trial, where every discrete trial is initiated contingent on the kid initiating. So basically the kid is asking for it and they don't get a demand until they want it. So very, very, very exciting stuff. And yeah, that Schillingsberg study research has been published for a couple of years now. So we can, maybe I can find a quick link, or yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Link it after, yeah.
Or afterwards. Yeah, I can't multitask.
Okay, so something that we're very aware of, and that we actually thought a lot about when publishing the paper, was like what about adding like a new term? And one, we're not like trademarking anything or insisting on a new term. And like, if we just think about it procedurally, we are talking about a different procedure to traditional extinction. We're adding or delivering an arbitrary reinforcer contingent on an interfering behavior. So like, that's not the same thing procedurally as straightforward extinction. And just like where we're at and the shifts that we see our field making, it might be important enough to emphasize compassion with how we talk about our procedures. It's interesting because when I think I first presented on this before it was published, it was probably 5 years ago, and lots of great feedback, and also some kind of skeptical feedback of like, are you sure? And then now once we publish the paper, like, it's with the passage of time, the feedback, like the theme of it has been a bit different. In that, again, like lots of positive feedback, which is awesome. And then like a lot of people with feedback of just like, you know, that by publishing this and maybe having the word kind and extinction together, that now that's sort of like justifying or giving more of a sense of permission of doing extinction before considering more just purely positive reinforcement or assent-based practices. And so like that's not the intention here. This is just like one procedure and step toward compassionate care. But it is worth considering, like, if these are our values, then it may be worth like looking at our terminology and like, yeah, even just the names of what we're calling stuff.
Yeah, and if we don't like the word kind extinction, we could call it, you know, extinction combined with functionally arbitrary response contingent delivery of reinforcers, but that's like pretty unwieldy. So seems like kind works better than that.
Mm-hmm. And we chose, it was like, it definitely in intentional choice that we chose the word kind rather than like compassionate extinction. Because the way that we define compassion, like, we didn't systematically measure, like, is this alleviating suffering for this person in the moment or in the future? It was more just like, based on what we see this kid likes, we're offering that contingent on this behavior in the moment. And so we could move, you know, toward that in the future in how we're measuring stuff if we want to like consider it compassion, but we didn't go there with this, and that was a very intentional because we don't want to assume what the learner's experience of our behavior was. And so like, just if we're going to choose to listen to some of the criticism, then we get to choose how we move forward with that. And so maybe examining and adjusting our procedures to be more compassionate without being less effective is where we want to be. And if having some new terminology is a way for us to genuinely reflect that we're listening and our commitment to these incremental shifts toward compassionate care within our field, then I think I can find some flexibility for some new terminology. Again, like, we're not insisting on calling it that. Call it just extinction if you want. Like, if that part doesn't matter, it's what we're choosing to do and what we're choosing for our behavior to be in those moments.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were planning on mentioning it already, Courtney, or if you did and I missed it, but after seeing these data and then trying it with a few more clients, it became clear that this just works. And so at that point, it felt like not really even ethical to not roll it out on a broader scale anymore, right? And so now all new staff at First Steps for Kids for a while now have been trained on this is just how you do extinction. And so at some point, I guess that will just be extinction. It won't need to be called kind extinction if we're doing this more consistently, either within an organization or as a field. And so, yeah, and now we're looking at a broader program evaluation to just sort of check in on that. But I think the short answer is it's working, right? Like, people are just doing this in general. This has become a normal part of how we do behavior intervention and behavior management, and it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate Dr. Rosedale, hey, April, her comment. they've chosen to use the name Extinction with Compassionate Acknowledgement at their agency. That's
Oh, I
great.
like that.
Yeah,
I like
same
that.
thing, right? Just different
Yeah.
word. Beautiful. Yeah, really
Yeah.
cool.
And then again, just that this is just an initial step. This is just one procedure. And we fully acknowledge that there are many others leading with their hearts right now, whether it's in research and contributing in that way, or in practice, or perhaps both. And so let's keep going. We are a community. And so like putting these shared values into action is where we're at, and like kind of getting lost in some of this discourse of like, it's not a new term, or it's a new term, but it's the same old procedure, or like, those sorts of conversations I think are very healthy to have, but like not to a point where it prevents us from moving forward. And so, like maybe this will contribute toward some sort of decision model, and we're working on that right now, of just like minimizing the use of extinction first, and just considering whether or not it's really a necessary piece of a learner's behavior plan. And then if so, then how do we increase the use of a scent-based practice with or without extinction? And if we are using extinction, how can we decrease the aversiveness of extinction for that individual learner? And so if we haven't convinced you with all of that, I think that we could agree on a commitment to just like not be jerks. Let's not be jerks with how we're implementing our procedures. And so that's it. Hopefully, yes, we do have times for questions, comments, things that you'd like to share about your practice. I have not been trying to multitask by keeping an eye on the chat or questions. So
I
I'll
see
stop
a
sharing.
great question that I want to call out, if that's okay. Someone's asking, how is this similar to or different from partial extinction as that's described in the FTF, the Greg Hanley and the today's ABA type approach?
Yeah. And I should have included that specifically in the decision model. I meant to, but just like that being part of a scent-based practice of just like reinforcing early on precursor behavior or low-level behavior, so that we're taking away the need to escalate and really acknowledging those lower forms of behavior as a form of communication. And so I think it fits right within that, whether we call it partial extinction or Briggs and colleagues published a paper on really just like manipulating the quality and magnitude of reinforcement. And so the same functional reinforcement is available for whatever the interfering behavior is, but just like a much richer quality form of reinforcement is available for whatever the alternative behavior is. And so by like making those simple arrangements, we may not need full extinction in order to bring about that behavior change.
Yeah, so this is a little bit different because we didn't reinforce the challenging behavior with the functional reinforcer.
Yeah.
We consequated it with functionally arbitrary reinforcers immediately, contingent on behavior, on the lowest levels of the behavior. So it is like doing something nice, right? Contingent on the behavior, but it's functionally different. And I'm not sure that it's better or worse, or it seems like you could definitely integrate both. And we've talked to Greg about this actually, and we've been talking about doing some research on that too. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm just kind of going through all of the open questions, and I see 3 that all have kind of a same theme. So maybe I'll read one and let you guys answer that. So how do you navigate kindness extinction with kids who seek attention in an unwanted manner? I can see myself validating the client's feelings when they're distraught, for example, when denied access. When given the validation for their feelings, they engage in attention-seeking behaviors such as climbing on the table and laughing. And there were 2 others that basically said, when the function is attention, can kind extinction still be implemented?
Yeah, so I mean that's a really important question, and I think just like really for future research, that would be like, that's just prime asking, like that's what we need to look at. It's always the go-to question, and so we don't know, of course, but I would say like before just completely withholding attention, similar to like what I was just describing from that Briggs article, of like just make sure that maybe you can quickly validate what the experience is, and yes, provide some attention. But like the better version of that, kind of the cooler version of that, and probably the attention that they're after, is available, for alternative behavior, or not contingent on whatever the interfering behavior is, so that we're not fully reinforcing whatever it is.
So yeah, maybe sort of a partial extinction thing, but we don't know. So people should, and we actually are talking to different groups about extending this to attention function.
To attention, yeah. And to me, just like within my clinical practice, like that's a risk I'm willing to take. Like I would rather validate and provide some attention, even if I full well know that that's part of the function. But also with like Hanley's work in the PFA, we also know like usually there's like a synthesized contingency there. And so I think that's also what that approach gives us, is that like we can kind of dial down one part of that contingency and then turn up the other forms of it. And so like if there's another part of that synthesized contingency in addition to the attention, then we can really dial that up for the alternative behavior that we're hoping to see.
Awesome. I also see some questions and comments that overlap here. One's from Amy about burnout, and then someone else was talking about parent buy-in, and I think they kind of go hand in hand. So it says, Amy says, it seems like there is a relationship between compassionate care and burnout too, with this vicious cycle, where if you don't provide compassionate care, perhaps you're at greater risk of burnout because it is emotionally more difficult than when the burnout happens. It reduces a person's ability to show up compassionately, and you start to see a lack of empathy with burnout in social service settings.
Yeah.
Curious what your thoughts are and whether compassionate care actually reduces the risk of burnout in our field, which is a very important topic as well.
Yeah, really important topic. I think that's a really important comment, and I would assume you're correct. So if we just look at it as the practitioners and our experience of it, it doesn't feel good to work through extinction bursts. To me at least, it doesn't feel like a badge of honor of like we're working through it, for whatever the outcome is. It doesn't feel good because we're empathizing with what the learner's experience is. And so by bringing, whether it's kind extinction or reinforcing early on or partial extinction, into our everyday practice, we're also like not working through those more severe behaviors. And so it's less aversive for the learner. It's more pleasant and feasible for us to be implementing. And so I would assume that would then carry over into like improving burnout. But of course we don't know that.
Awesome.
Yeah, we don't know. We need research on that, but it sure makes sense from a functional perspective, because if you're decreasing the overall amount of distress and aversiveness for both client and clinician, probably that's going to have a positive effect on burnout, potentially at least.
And then also with parent buy-in, have you all experienced that parents are more on board and excited about kind extinction?
Yeah, for sure. And that also was one of the primary reasons we looked at it. And that's an extension that we would like to do. It's just like this same procedure, but implemented by parents, because I think it's just kind of easier in that way. Like the parents want to provide comfort, and sometimes it feels like, or they feel like, and I've been given this feedback, that they're being asked to choose between like comforting their child and doing what is like right for like managing their behavior. And if we can give them a way to do both, then like it just makes sense that it would increase parent buy-in. And that was the initial feedback we got on the social validity survey that we sent, but like definitely more research is needed there.
Awesome. Do each of you want to kind of, if you click on that Q&A on the bottom, you can look at the open questions and each maybe pick one to answer, and then we can maybe wrap things up after that, depending on time. Or if you prefer me to pick one, I can.
So anonymous attendee, at what point do you begin placing demands that aren't the child's choice? Tolerance of those environmental conditions is essential for typical school and home life, right? Yeah, and this actually fits with another question that was in the chat, not the Q&A, that was sort of like, how are the demands presented? Were they presented in a compassionate way? Would that make a difference? And so in answer to the first question, we did do escape extinction, but we did it as kindly as possible. And so we didn't terminate the demands when the kids didn't want to do them. We just didn't use any physical guidance, and we sort of did the waited out escape extinction thing where you wait for the kid to be ready, and when they're ready, then they come and complete the work, and they just don't get access to whatever the preferred positive reinforcers are later on until they complete the work. And so we actually were implementing the demands just as much as we did in baseline during the kind extinction procedure. And in terms of were the demands delivered compassionately, I think our standard training procedure at First Steps for Kids is to deliver instruction in sort of an upbeat, positive, sort of fast-paced, happy format. So hopefully our staff are usually doing that and being, relatively upbeat and compassionate in how they deliver the instructions. But there's going to be variability there, and that's not, I don't think that that's something we specifically defined or controlled in baseline, right? Like how to deliver the instructions. I think it was like just do business as usual, right?
Yeah, and we tried like to keep that consistent, obviously, so that the delivery of whatever instructions we were giving wasn't different during the kind extinction treatment phase. One person in the Q&A asked how you would recommend trying to incorporate kind extinction, compassionate ABA when the leadership tends to shy away from this direction for ABA services. And so any suggestions on how to appeal to leadership to make positive changes in the approach as a company? That's a great question. And I think why just like more research is needed. Sometimes I'll tease Jonathan like with some of his research, and I'll be like, oh, it was like a no-duh study, And in one way, I do feel like sort of kind extinction was that like it was kind of obvious it would work from the start, and also not. And I think it's really important that like us as practitioners, that we're contributing to the research with what we know works and we see on a daily basis, but like we need to make sure that what we're doing is evidence-based. And so I think like appealing to your leadership maybe in that way, that like once there's enough research saying that like, hey, doing it this way with these small additions so that we can be a bit more compassionate while implementing what our procedures are, like once we have a really solid foundation with various approaches as that commonality, then like I think it will be a lot more difficult to not lean in and be part of that change.
Yeah, and I would say also like show them the graph. Here's 4 participants that it worked for, and so that's enough evidence to try it out with one client. So maybe you're not going to convince the clinical director to change everything across the whole agency, but maybe with one client, try it with one client. Take some good data, have a look at the data. If it works reasonably well with that one client, maybe try it with another. If it works with them, at some point, you're going to have enough internal data. It doesn't have to have all the perfect IOA and multiple baseline, all that stuff, just good quality clinical data. Once you have enough of that, it's going to be hard to say like, no, we should do it the old-fashioned grouchier way when we have clear data that being nicer to the kids works. And then it'll naturally grow. That's what we did. It just naturally grew internally because we felt like, well, how can we not do this anymore? It's working. And we collect data. We know how to do that, right?
Awesome. Well, I truly cannot thank both of you enough. This was just such a critical topic, and I'm just so happy that we were able to talk about it. So our last keyword is matters, because compassionate care matters. And truly, I have been in the field for about 15 years. I've been a BCBA for 10 years. And just thinking back on when I went to college and when I did my independent field work, so much has changed and evolved for the better over this past decade. And I just truly appreciate that the Tarboxes are not only doing the research, they're disseminating it, they're directly helping kiddos as well. So thank you so much for your time to share this with us. So once again, last keyword is matters. If you want to learn more, check out our website. You can book a demo to see how our platform can help you. Please also don't forget to complete the form in the chat to earn your CEU. I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you so much for joining us to learn and grow together. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
you.